The purpose of this video is to cover transparent encryption client profiles. Whenever you register an agent with CipherTrust Manager, that agent is always assigned a client profile. If you don't specify a client profile during the registration process, then you're assigned the default profile. Profiles impact and define certain behavior of the client. So for example, on this host, I've got the default client profile assigned. I can change the profile of choice if I have more than one defined. And of course, you can use profiles to affect the behavior of a number of clients. Let's take a quick look at some of that behavior that we can edit. So when you look at the profile, there are categories of behaviors and attributes that you can impact. For example, you can impact the logging behavior. For example, this profile determines that the log level is error, so error messages and above are retained, but informational messages may not be retained. Also, it shows that the error messages or auditing records are going to be logged to a local file, but they're not going to be uploaded to the key manager. In this case, the key manager is CipherTrust Manager. So if you do want to see those records on CipherTrust Manager, then you must turn this on for that profile, and therefore all the clients that use this profile will then start having their auditing records uploaded to CipherTrust Manager as well as being placed in a file. One most common thing that you'll change in a profile is for audit records for events such as permit or deny IOs. A permit IO is an informational message. So if you want to see that type of record, then you must change the level for that host or that profile. Via that profile, you must change the message to info. So you'll see permit audits, which are informational messages, and denied audits, which are error messages, which you'll by default see because it is above and included with the informational message. The only thing you won't see in this situation is debug records. Another common thing that you'll turn on in a profile is concise logging. Concise logging will minimize certain type of audit records that are really common. For example, if you have an application such as a database, SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, doesn't really matter. Quite often you may want an audit record if SQL Server, Oracle, or MySQL opens a file. You may want that as an auditable event, but you don't want an audit event for every I/O. So for example, SQL Server might open a file and then do read file, read file, read file, read file, read file, read file, read file over and over again. Well, you don't need every audit record for every read if that's the kind of behavior. You only want the audit record for the very first read. So if you turn on concise logging, then you'll greatly reduce the number of repetitive records. If you want to send the Syslog message or the audit records to a Syslog server, then you would set this in the Syslog configuration. Again, you can specify what level and what the Syslog server or SIM tool is where you want the audit records to be sent to. If you're using LDT, you can then also throttle the rekey behavior. So when you initially implement a policy and you go from unencrypted to encrypted, right? LDT will do that for you, and you can specify by either CPU percentage or IO or megabyte throughput as how much of that workload should be throttled on that host. Of course, you can also specify time frames when you want the rekey to take place. You can specify, I only want the rekey to take place between midnight and 3 a.m. Multi-factor authentication is a new functionality introduced into the agent as well as the client profile. So if you have a guard point on a host, that you want to have MFA or multi-factor authentication applied to access that guard point, then this is where you could configure that. And the last thing you can configure is server settings. Server settings is about how you want the communication to the CyberTrust Manager cluster to be preferred. So let's say, for example, I've got a cluster, and in this cluster I have two nodes, right? There's the current node and then whatever my pair node is. Now I could have 3 nodes, I could have 10 nodes. If these nodes are separated by geography or region, say North America and South America, or North America and EMEA, or East Coast, West Coast, and I want to specify the client should communicate first to the most local node, then I can do that via that setting. So if I go back into the profile, I can specify tiers of the members of the cluster. So tier 1 is communicate first to this node, or I could have multiple nodes in tier 1 if I have multiple CyberTrust Manager in the cluster. And they're going to have subsequent tiers. And that means basically communicate to these nodes first, and in the event I cannot communicate to these nodes, then communicate to another set of nodes. And that's the overview of the Transparent Encryption Client Profile.